Hello and welcome to Breaking Down, the series where we take an in-depth look at a Fire Emblem unit from a gameplay perspective. Before we start, I would like to thank the people who have backed the channel on Patreon, where for just £1 a month, you can vote on the next unit to be released in this series. More on this at the end. Today we will be looking at the Ashen Wolves member, Hapi. Whilst this series is not focused around plot, there is always a chance for spoilers, and certain elements of the game and its structure and story will inevitably be mentioned, so if that is a concern for you, feel free to give it a miss. Also, where relevant, this is considering the maddening difficulty on a regular new game file with no exploits or excessive grinding. Before we get into the video itself, Hapi is one of my absolute favourite units in the game, both in terms of character and gameplay, and whilst I will always strive to make sure these videos are objective, and I feel confident that this has had no impact on the video, I feel making this apparent from the get-go with a disclaimer like this is the easiest way to ensure that you are aware of any and all factors that go into it, and that could present any form of bias in anything that is said. Hapi is a member of the Ashen Wolves, meaning that she doesn't come with any of the main houses. This also means that you will need to own the game's DLC and have beaten Chapter 5 of the Cindered Shadows side story to be able to use her in the main game. Other than this, there are no requirements to using Hapi. You can recruit her from Chapter 2 with any house regardless of anything else, although there are some benefits to recruiting her after this point, which we will go over in more detail later in the video. Hapi's personal ability is Monstrous Appeal, which has two effects. Firstly, any attack she performs against a monster will be classed as an effective attack, which will automatically break the barrier tile that is hit, and it will also double the damage of the weapon or spell that is used. Secondly, if Hapi is in the range of the monster, that monster will target her over anybody else, unless it is under the effect of a gambit. The first of these effects is just all around very nice. It allows for some solid damage to monsters in any scenario, as well as being a very easy way to break their barriers. The second effect here is more of a mixed bag. There are a lot of times where this can be inconvenient, as you do not want Hapi to take the attack, but since you know it's going to happen, you can play around it quite effectively. Since the effect also does not override that of gambits, you can still position Hapi in range and have her not be targeted. On top of this, you can build Hapi in a way where she can take these attacks very well, making use of items such as the Seros Shield to minimise the damage she takes from these monsters, which can give her some interesting possibilities. Overall, this personal is quite situational since it's only useful against specific enemies, but it can come in handy quite a bit. Hapi holds a major crest of Timotheus, which gives her a 20% chance to conserve uses of healing magic. This isn't usually anything too impactful, but it can be nice on occasion, especially early on with Hapi having access to heal and physic in her spell list. It can also be quite a useful crest for rigging, since quite a few have 20% procs, so if you get this but would rather transfer it to something else by Divine Pulsing, such as Constance's Crest of Noah, you can do so with very little downside. Of course, this also lets Hapi use relics without taking any damage, which can be appreciated. Before moving on to Hapi's skills and stats, it's worth remembering that she joins at level 3 at the earliest, rather than level 1 like most units. With that in mind, Hapi has 3 boons in Reason, Riding and Flying, 3 Banes in Brawling, Authority and Heavy Armour, and a budding talent in Axes. Outside of this, it's worth noting that she has a raised Lance rank which starts at D for some reason. Whilst it may seem minor, access to Tempest Lance for free can be useful in the early game, just as a reasonable damaging option. Hapi, first and foremost, is a mage, which makes her spell list very relevant, and in this case hers is frankly outstanding. It is absolutely loaded with desirable tools throughout, and offers a lot of different, very strong tools. Kicking off with Reason, where Hapi holds a boon, and the first thing to note is that Hapi utilises dark magic, rather than the more common black magic. This typically has lower accuracy, but makes up for it with higher damage or utility effects. The other thing to note with this is that she does not benefit from Black Tome Fair, which is on a lot of magical classes, such as Warlock or Dark Flyer. Thanks to her D+ base, Hapi starts with both Miasma and Swarm. The former is a pretty basic spell, offering a little more might than most base level spells in exchange for a little less accuracy and being a bit heavier. Swarm is a pretty inaccurate option, especially in the early game, but comes with the very useful benefit of reducing the speed of enemies hit by 5. This can be particularly useful when fighting bulkier enemies who may need multiple hits to take down, especially things like monsters. Whilst it is quite situational, it can still have its uses. Banshee comes at the C rank, and outside of being reasonably powerful for the time, reduces the enemy's movement by 5 if they are hit by this, which is an incredibly powerful effect that will essentially just lock down a lot of early or mid-game opponents, and heavily neuter the rest. At the B rank comes Death, which gives Hapi a 1-3 range option. It's a little high ranked for what it is, but is still very appreciated to give Hapi some extended range. Lastly, at the A rank comes Hades, which has 18 might, giving her some reasonable kill power against squishier opponents. All in all, this is a very solid all-around lineup, providing a great mix of utility options to give her an answer to most problems. Over in Faith, and unfortunately Hapi does not bring a boon in this area. However, it is worth noting that it will slightly raise to a D base when not recruited if you pick her up between and including chapters 3 and 5, after which it drops back to E for some reason. Some of what happens to Hapi's skills is a little odd. This hitting D rank for chapter 3 is particularly useful as it means you can delay her recruitment by 1 chapter and be rewarded with her both starting in Monk and getting 100 classy XP in a non-boon area, as well as a little extra in Reason too. As for her spells in this field, Hapi gets access to Heal and Nosferatu at D and D+, respectively, just like every other unit. After this, they seemingly wanted to make up for her not getting a boon. At the C rank she gets Physic, a long-range healing option that can be excellent for patching up long-distance allies' HP, and having an opportunity to gain EXP on almost every turn. This also synergizes very well with the Crest of Timotheus. At the B rank she gets Seraphim, an 8 might damaging spell which is effective against monsters. Whilst Hapi already has effective damage against monsters from Monstrous Appeal, the way this works is a little odd. When the bonus is provided by an ability or combat art, it doubles the might of the weapon or spell. However, when the bonus comes from the weapon or spell itself, this actually triples the might of the spell or weapon. This means that whilst all of Hapi's spells receive double damage against monsters, Seraphim's is still tripled to 24, meaning that other than Hades, it is still her best option against them, which can be very useful at wiping them out. Now, all of this is already excellent, however, to top it all off, at the A rank in Faith, Hapi gains access to Warp. This allows her to teleport an adjacent ally to a range that is within 1/4 of her magic stat. This is an absolutely premier tool for Hapi to get, and can be incredibly influential on your team. In my opinion, this is the absolute best spell in the game, and beyond that, one of, if not the best tool a unit can get in general. Whilst not having a boon can make this investment heavy to reach, you can still acquire it around chapter 8, even with some investments into other areas, and the payoff for this investment is absolutely worth it. Overall, Hapi's spell list is really hard to fault. She has an early debuff in Swarm, a movement debuff in Banshee, a 1-3 range in Death, a mini nuke in Hades, the most desirable healing spell in Physic, a solid monster killer in Seraphim, and the creme de la creme, Warp. For basically any situation, Hapi will have a tool to help you out, and manages to be an excellent combatant, healer, and utility unit all rolled into one. The boon in Reason will also help her reach a lot of classes to let her take advantage of this, and assist in unlocking prowess skills to let those Reason spells shine. The other 2 boons in Riding and Flying are mostly useful for class certifications, with Riding being the more beneficial of the 2, so the raised base here is appreciated. Whilst Flying can be useful for certifying into Dark Flyer, the class provides no magic modifier, and only Black Tome Fair rather than Dark Tome Fair, meaning it doesn't enhance the damage of Hapi's spells at all, which can make it less desirable. Still, it can hold uses, and the boon in Riding can be useful for classes such as Valkyrie, so overall these are nice to have. The budding talent in Axes can actually be much more useful than it may initially seem. If you tutor Hapi in this area 12 times, you will master the talent, turning it into a boon and unlocking the combat art Exhaustive Strike. This combat art will break the weapon that is used with it, however, in exchange for that, it provides 3 might, 10 hit, and adds 30% of the weapon's durability as might to the attack too. Whilst Hapi is not a physically specialised unit, this can actually still do some massive damage, particularly with a Steel Axe Plus, which has a massive 60 durability. This means that the combat art provides 21 damage alongside the axe's 13 might, for a colossal combined 34 damage before anything else such as Hapi's strength or any other bonuses. Whilst on the surface it doesn't sound like this would be too useful for Hapi, it is always going to hit for a lot of damage on a good chunk of opponents, particularly those which have a lower defense in exchange for a higher resistance such as mages. Considering it is relatively cheap to pick up, requiring just D axes to be able to equip the weapon and tutoring 12 times in axes for the attack, and mages almost always have free spaces in both their combat art slots and their inventory to carry around a couple of axes, it can actually see some relevance. It's not going to be a primary method of attack or anything, but it's not completely useless either, and can be helpful from time to time. Once mastered, this boon can also help let Hapi make use of a bolt axe if the rank is pushed up to B, which when forged is a 14 might 1-3 range option, which can be beneficial if you're willing to put in the investment to reach it, although that is quite a sizable amount, and considering Hapi already has a 1-3 range form of attack from the death spell, it may be more desirable to sink this investment elsewhere. That being said, the axe does offer significantly more might, and can provide a useful alternate method of attack against a lot of late game enemies, particularly the War Masters, who commonly come equipped with Tonebreaker. The Banes in Brawling and Heavy Armor are mostly irrelevant. The latter could be looked at for a potential Armor Knight certification to boost Hapi's defense to the class's base of 12, however most of the time this would largely not be ideal anyway, so it isn't getting in the way too much. Even if you did want this, the class can be gambled with C axes and E plus heavy armor, so only 40 class EXP is needed in this area anyway, so a Bane still wouldn't get in the way too much should you feel the additional defense would be helpful. The Bane in Authority certainly plays much more of a role, and can make it require notably more investment to be able to use desirable gambits. This can be noticeable throughout the game. The early magic boosting battalions require D Authority, which is slowed down by this, taking investment away from other desirable areas, and can also potentially push it back by a chapter. Later down the line, this also slows down access to some of the high magic boosts that can be gotten from the premier battalions. However, she should still be able to push through to a B rank to make use of these without too much trouble. You could also opt to give her some of the lower ranked utility gambits, which can also help your team out. Moving on to the numbers, the most important thing here is Hapi's magic, which sits very comfortably at 12, allowing for her to make excellent use of those powerful magical tools, and whilst a 45% growth is nothing special, it's more than enough to let her continue to thrive throughout the game. Her strength of 7 is also not shambolic for a magical unit, just 1 point below the benchmark for some physical units, and this lets her make reasonable use of Tempest Lance early if you wanted to do so in order to snag a couple of extra kills. She also has a solid dex stat for a couple of extra points of hit, which is never a bad thing. Whilst her speed of 7 isn't terrible, she is only offsetting 1 point of weapon weight, and her dark magic spells are quite heavy, so she will likely struggle to avoid getting doubled a lot of the time, and will need to be careful with regards to this. Her HP and defense are also pretty mediocre, which leaves her even more susceptible to enemies who are able to reach her. That being said, she does have a comfortably good resistance of 8, which helps against magical opponents. The other stat which is quite poor is Charm, leaving her in a difficult spot in terms of hitting and avoiding gambits. The first thing to go over when talking about using Hapi from a gameplay perspective is when you should actually recruit her. Whilst you can pick her up on Chapter 2 to make use of her on the Chapter 2 mission, I would actually advise holding off, and instead recruiting her on Chapter 3. This raises her faith rank from E to D, giving her access to heal, as well as pushing her closer to that all-important warp spell. It also puts her at level 5 and in the Monk class, rather than level 3 in Noble, meaning that she doesn't have to slog through those 2 levels with half spellcasts. If you did choose to use Hapi on Chapter 2, she isn't a massive contributor anyway. She is unlikely to have access to her faith magic at this time, so all she really gets is a few casts of Miasma and Swarm. The latter can be useful for the speed drop, but it isn't really anything special, especially with its low accuracy. With this in mind, it just further advocates for picking her up a chapter later and letting her level up automatically. You don't miss much, and she comes in a better position than she would likely be in otherwise, so there is very little downside to this. That being said, there is one other thing that Hapi can do early on, which is make use of the Tempest Lance combat art which she has by default. This seems odd, but with her base 7 strength, this outputs only 1 less damage than some physical units, such as Ingrid, Ferdinand, or Ashe making use of this too, and thanks to the plus 8 might granted by the combat art, it still hits quite hard. I wouldn't say this is a reason to recruit her for Chapter 2, but if you did, it is a valid way for her to pick up a couple of additional kills to pump her level up. You can of course make use of this later too, but once you are into Monk, clicking a spell will be better in most cases. Hapi is a unit where, put simply, the more tools she gets, the better she becomes. She very much likes having a number of things she can do each turn, and the more she unlocks, the more she contributes. That being said, you also want to make sure you keep a focus on getting her most useful and powerful tool, Warp, which raises a question of how much investment you should push into her Reason list at an early stage. She already joins with D plus Reason, however pushing this up to C has a couple of benefits. Firstly, this will unlock the Banshee spell for her, allowing her to reduce enemy movement by 5 when they are hit by this. In the early and much of the mid-game, this will lock most opponents in place, effectively like a single target gambit, making it a very strong bit of utility for her to be able to make use of, especially with 5 casts of it being able to be used on each map. Pushing her Reason up to C also means that a certification into Mage at level 10 will not have to be gambled, which is an added benefit. From here, her best bet is to pump her investment into Faith, to push towards that A rank as soon as you can. The one exception to this could be to grab 100 Authority EXP to be able to equip some of the early D rank magic battalions. Although she has a Bane in this area, 100 EXP is still not too big of an investment to reach, especially with Professor's guidance taken into account, and the fact that Authority is basically gained from every action she performs, providing she is equipped with a battalion, so this is probably worth doing early. On the other hand, you could also give her a utility battalion such as Stride, so that she can make use of a Gambit without having to navigate her struggling charm. Investing in her Faith will unlock some solid tools on the way to Warp. At the C rank she gets Physic, a long-range healing spell which can be very helpful in keeping her allies topped up on health. Of course, the added benefit of this is that it gives Hapi an easy way to perform an action for both some level and Faith EXP each turn, since it has a huge range. A lot of the time you will find yourself clicking this just to give Hapi a contribution on each turn, even if you don't need the heal, and honestly that's fine. You get 5 casts of this, don't be too conservative with it. Another strong tool she will gain access to is Seraphim, which has its 8 might tripled to 24 when used against monsters. This means that it outdamages all of her other spells against these except for the A rank Reason spell, Hades, even with Monstrous Appeal factored in. This isn't something that's always useful, but when it is, it can be very appreciated. It should be noted that any attack Hapi performs against monsters will already fully break the tile of barrier that she hits, thanks again to Monstrous Appeal. Access to Physic and Seraphim means that although Warp is the end goal of the Faith investment, it is extremely beneficial for her outside of this, and provides access to a lot of useful things for her. As was alluded to earlier, when she hits level 10, her ideal class is Mage. This gives her an additional point of magic while she is in the class, as well as access to the Fire spell for her stay in it. This is much more accurate and lighter than her other options, so being able to use this is appreciated. Mastering the Mage class also gives Hapi Fiendish Blow, an ability which grants the user 6 magic when they initiate combat, helping her damage output quite significantly, and making her much more of a kill threat to a lot of enemies. You should be looking at around chapter 8 or 9 to unlock Warp, and obviously the earlier the better. Unlocking this can be very game-changing and allow you to be much more flexible with your positioning and movement, and get much more out of your strongest units. Even if you already have another unit with Warp, being able to use multiple in a turn and more per map is still incredibly valuable. One thing to keep in mind is that Warp's range is dictated from the position of the caster, so this can be important in getting the most out of the spell. Unlocking Warp opens the potential of using the spell to skip maps, by warping a unit to the boss to end it on the first turn. I will paraphrase what I said in the Lysithea video regarding this here. Whilst warp skipping is an extremely easy and fast way to beat a lot of maps in the game, and is a very potent strategy, I don't think it lines up with the way most people play, and most people prefer to play maps rather than skip them. For that reason, skipping won't be a major factor in the discussion here, but regardless, Warp is still incredibly strong. After getting Warp, Hapi becomes very flexible to pick up whatever she desires. The most obvious point of investment is to continue bumping up Reason to be able to access Death and Hades, the last 2 spells in this part of her spell list. This gives her a very nice ranged option from the former, and her highest damage spell from the latter. Now can also be a good time to bump up her axes if you wanted to access Exhaustive Strike from mastering the budding talent, and potentially use of a Bolt Axe if you were willing to bump it up to a B rank, although the latter is a lot of investment. Once Hapi hits level 20, there are a few options you can look at going with her, and a couple of these can probably be ruled out pretty quickly. Warlock can probably be given a miss here. Its biggest benefits are the Black Magic amplifying abilities, Black Tome Fair and Black Magic uses ×2. Whilst these are very good for a lot of units, Hapi doesn't use Black Magic, so yeah, this is pretty pointless. The other is Dark Flyer. Again, this class brings Black Tome Fair, however this time with no magic modifier either, so it gives no extra damage to Hapi's spells. There is also only one flying magic battalion, the Nouvelle Flyer Corps at the B rank, and since Hapi has a Bane here, it's usually more desirable to go for a grounded option. One strong choice that remains is Valkyrie, which requires B Reason and B Riding. These requirements are easily attainable since she has boons in both areas, as well as a couple of boosted base ranks. Pushing up to at least being able to gamble this, or even reaching the actual requirements, won't be a problem at all. This is a mounted class that brings 6 move and Canto, giving Hapi pretty decent mobility. It also brings a +4 magic modifier, helping her damage and things such as Warp's range. On top of this, it brings the 2 abilities Black Magic range +1 and Dark Magic range +1, the latter of which can be very impactful. Mastering Valkyrie can also be very important for Hapi, as this grants the ability Uncanny Blow, which grants an additional 30 hit to the user when they initiate combat. This can be extremely beneficial for Hapi's reliability and overall accuracy, and just makes her a lot more consistent. Whilst mastering the class does require 150 class EXP, this isn't really an issue considering the class is already strong for Hapi, so it's not like it's out of the way or anything like that. Overall, Uncanny Blow is just very desirable. Valkyrie is a great class for Hapi, but it does have one contender at this stage, and that is Bishop. This has the sole requirement of A Faith, the same as Warp, so classing into this is usually not a chore at all. In the majority of ways, Valkyrie outclasses this. However, Bishop does bring one very useful tool which makes it an immediate contender, and that is White Magic uses ×2, which most importantly allows for an additional cast of Warp on each map. This is pretty massive and can be highly sought after, so despite Valkyrie having more benefits, this one can often outweigh it, especially if Hapi is your only warper. Since the requirements are likely to be met anyway, I think this is always worth certifying for so that you can get that extra warp use if you need it. Outside of the extra warp, Bishop does also offer White Magic healing +10, which can hold some small benefits by allowing her healing magic to restore a little extra HP. It does also bring a +2 magic modifier, which is less than Valkyrie but better than nothing at all. The biggest drawback of the class is its very limited 4 move, which can make it a struggle to keep up with the action and the rest of your party, especially if you use Warp on turn 1. The class also doesn't bring the range modifiers that Valkyrie does, which are also a loss. Whichever of these you opt for, or both if you choose to alternate between them, will leave Hapi able to contribute very well. It's just up to which aspects of her you prefer to exploit the most. This continues through to the Master stage, where again there are a couple of choices of classes you could look at going into. The first of these is Gramarye, which requires A Reason and A Faith, which should be attainable with how late this class unlocks, especially with the boon in the former area. This class is basically like a souped up version of Bishop, bringing not only White Magic uses ×2, but also Dark Magic uses ×2 as well. Whilst the former is definitely the most important, the latter could see some use too. Gramarye also brings 5 move rather than Bishop's 4, and a +5 magic modifier, the highest in the game, which is very appreciated. All in all, if you wanted to make use of Warp as her primary use, or if Bishop was your main class during the Advanced stage, this will be the best option and let Hapi contribute excellently. Another late option is Dark Knight, with requirements of B+ Reason, A Riding, and C Lancers. This option is more similar to Valkyrie, although unlike the difference between Bishop and Gramarye, I don't think Dark Knight is strictly an upgrade over the level 20 class. This class provides 7 move and Canto, which gives it better mobility, and it also brings Dark Tome Fair and a +2 magic modifier, increasing damage on all of her Dark Magic spells by 7 overall. What the class lacks is the additional range that is provided by Valkyrie, which is why the former still holds some merit here. Also, despite Valkyrie offering less damage, the higher magic modifier can help Warp. Any of these can give you excellent use from Hapi, and any can be optimal depending on your team setup and what you actually want out of her. The Valkyrie and Dark Knight setups can be particularly strong if you have other warpers who are already in Bishop or Gramarye, since whilst more is always helpful, you can better afford to lose a cast in order to take advantage of Hapi's other strengths. With all the utility that is loaded into Hapi's spell list, she will usually be able to help out in any situation, and can contribute extremely well. This about wraps up Hapi. I hope this helps you to get the most out of one of my favourite characters in the game. I would once again like to thank the people who have backed the channel on Patreon. It really helps me out a lot, and the support is greatly appreciated. When this video goes live, the poll for the next unit in the series to be released will still be running, which is open to every remaining unit who has not yet been covered, so if you want to have your say, you can do so for just £1, which lets you vote on all of these for a month. It also provides other benefits such as any inside info regarding upcoming videos, a role in the Discord server, and of course, your name being in these credits. If you want to discuss this video, the channel, or Fire Emblem in general, consider joining the Discord. Thank you very much for watching.